It's a matter of will, Frank Chalmers said to his face in the mirror. The phrase was the only residue of the dream he had been having when he awoke. He shaved with quick, decisive strokes, feeling tense, crammed with energy, ready to be unleashed, wanting to get to work. More residue. Whoever wants it the most wins. He showered and dressed, padded down to the dining hall. It was just after dawn. Sunlight flooded Isidis with horizontal beams of red bronze light. So the previous section was just Frank's dream? No. I didn't say that at all. The previous section was a eulogy to John Boone and about his legendary status and how everyone's like, literally the earthquakes happened right at the hour that the clock stroked John's death. I was there and I saw Arkady crying, and he blew his snot on my sweater. And I said, "It's okay, man. I won't charge you for it." That's what that section was. And now, okay, wait. So you guys don't know though, because that section was all italicized, and now we're back into the regular font section. It's a matter of will, Frank Chalmers said to his face in the mirror. The phrase was the only residue of the dream he had been having when he awoke. He shaved with quick, decisive strokes, feeling tense, crammed with energy, ready to be unleashed, wanting to get to work. More residue. Whoever wants it most wins. He showered and dressed, padded down to the dining hall. It was just after dawn. Sunlight flooded Isidis with horizontal beams of red bronze light. And high in the eastern sky, cirrus clouds looked like copper shavings. Rashid Niazi, the Syrian representative to the conference, passed by and gave Chalmers a cool nod. Frank returned it and walked on. Because of Salim al-Hayil, the Ahad wing of the Muslim Brotherhood had gotten blamed for Boone's assassination. Because of Salim al-Hayil, the Ahad wing of the Muslim Brotherhood had gotten blamed for Boone's assassination. And Chalmers had always been quick and public in defending them from all such accusations. Salim had been the lone assassin, he always asserted. A mad murder-suicide. This underlined the Ahad's guilt, while at the same time commanding their gratitude. Naturally, Niazi, an Ahad leader, was a bit frustrated. Maya came into the dining room and Frank greeted her cordially, automatically covering the discomfort he always felt in her presence. "May I join you?" she said, watching him. "Of course." Maya was perceptive in her way. Frank concentrated on the moment. They chatted. The subject of the treaty began to come. The subject of the treaty began to come. I keep wanting to say it began to came up. And I can't stop myself. The subject of the treaty began to come up. And so Frank said, The subject of the treaty began to come up. And so Frank said, "How I wish John were here now. We could use him. And then, I miss him." This kind of thing would distract Maya instantly. She put her hand over his. Frank scarcely felt it. She was smiling, her arresting gaze fully on him. Despite himself, he had to look away. The TV wall was showing the news package beamed up from Earth, and he tapped on the table console and turned up the sound. Earth was in bad shape. The video was of a massive protest march in Manhattan. The whole island packed with a crowd the protesters would call 10 million, and the police 500,000. The helicopter images were quite arresting, but there were a lot of places these days that, although less visual, were much more dangerous. In the advanced nations, people were marching because of draconian birth reduction acts, laws that made the Chinese look like anarchists, and the young had erupted in fury and dismay, feeling their lives pulled out of their hands by a great crowd of ancient, unnatural dead, by history itself come alive. That was bad, sure, but in the developing countries, they were rioting over inadequate access to the treatments themselves, and that was far worse. Governments were falling. People were dying by the thousands. Really, these images of Manhattan were probably meant to reassure. Everything's still orderly, they said. People conducting themselves civilly, even if it is civil disobedience. But Mexico City and Sao Paulo and New Delhi and Manila were in flames. Maya looked at the screen and read aloud one of the Manhattan banners. "Send the old to Mars." That's the essence of a bill someone's introduced in Congress. Reach 100 and you're off. To retirement orbitals, the moon, or here. Especially here. Oh. Shit. Okay, I got the dialogue mixed up. Maya looked at the screen and read aloud one of the Manhattan banners. "Send the old to Mars." That's the essence of a bill someone's introduced in Congress. Reach 100 and you're off. To retirement orbitals, the moon, or here. Especially here. Maybe, he said. I suppose that explains their stubbornness about immigration quotas. Frank nodded. We'll never get those. They're under too much pressure down there. We're seen as one of the few escape valves. Did you see that program aired on Eurovid about all the open land on Mars? Maya shook her head. It was like a real estate ad. No. If the UN delegates give us any say in emigration, they'd be crucified. So what do we do? He shrugged. Insist on the old treaty at every point? Act like every change is the end of the world. So that's why you were so crazy about the preface material. Sure, that stuff may not be all that important, but we're like the British at Waterloo. If we give in at any point, the whole line collapses. She laughed. She was pleased with him. She admired his strategy. And it was a good strategy, although it was not the one he was pursuing. For they were not like the British at Waterloo. They were, if anything, like the French, making a last-ditch assault, which they had to win if they wanted to survive. And so he had been very busy giving in on many points in the treaty, hoping to thrust forward and hold on to what he really wanted in other areas, which certainly included some remaining role for the American Martian Department and its secretary. After all, he needed a base to work with. So he shrugged, dismissing her pleasure. On the TV wall, the crowds boiled up and down the great avenues. He clenched his teeth a few times. We'd better get to it again. Upstairs, the conferees were milling about in a sequence of long, high rooms that were divided by tall partitions. Sunlight streamed into the big central room from the eastern meeting chambers, throwing a ruddy glare over the white pile carpet and the squarish teak chairs and the dark pink stone of the long tabletop. Knots of people were chatting casually against the walls. Maya went off to confer with Samantha and Spencer. The three of them were now the leaders of the Mars First Coalition, and as such had been invited to the conference as non-voting representatives of the Martian population. The People's Party, the Tribunes, and the only ones there actually elected to their positions, although they were there only at Helmut's sufferance. Helmut had been inclusive as anyone could ask. He had allowed Anne to attend as a non-voting member representing the Reds, even though they were part of the coalition. Sachs was there, observing for the terraforming team, and any number of mining and development executives were observing as well. There was a whole crowd of observers. There was a whole crowd of observers, in fact. But the voting members were the only ones to sit at the central table, where Helmut was now ringing a small bell. 53 national representatives and 18 UN officials took their seats. Another 100 continued to wander in the eastern rooms, watching the Another 100 continued to wander in the eastern rooms, watching the discussion through open portals or on small TVs. Outside the windows, burrows crawled with figures and vehicles, moving around in the clear-walled mesas and the tents on and between the mesas. And in the network of connecting clear walk tubes that lay on the ground or arched through the air. And in the huge valley tent with its wide street grass boulevards and its canals. A little metropolis. Helmut called the session to order. In the eastern rooms, people clustered around the TVs. Frank glanced through a portal into the east room nearest him. There would be rooms like that all over Mars and Earth. Thousands of them with millions of observers. 2 worlds watching. The day's topic, as it had been for the past 2 weeks, was emigration quotas. China and India had a joint proposal to make. The head of the Indian office rose and read it in his musical Bombay English. Stripped of camouflage, it came down to the proportional system, of course. Chalmers shook his head. India and China between them had 40% of the world's population. But they were only 2 votes of 53 at this conference, and their proposal would never pass. But they were only 2 votes of 53 at this conference, and their proposal would never pass. The Brit in the European delegation rose to point out this fact. Not in so many words, of course. Wrangling began. It would go on all morning. Mars was a real prize. And the rich and poor nations of Earth were struggling over it as they were over everything else. The rich had the money, but the poor had the people. And the weapons were pretty evenly distributed, especially the new viral sectors that could kill everyone on a continent. Yes, the stakes were high, and the situation existed in the most fragile of balances. The poor surging up out of the south and pressing the northern barriers of law and money and pure military force. Gun barrels in their face, in essence. But now there were so many faces. A human wave attack might explode at any instant. It seemed, just from the expansive pressure of sheer numbers. Attackers shoved over the barricades by the press of babies in the rear, raging for their chance at immortality. At the mid-morning break, with nothing more accomplished, Frank rose from his seat. He had heard little of the wrangle, but he had been thinking, and his lectern sketchpad was marked up with a rough schematic. Money, people, land, guns. Old equations, old trade-offs. But it wasn't originality he was after. It was something that would work. Nothing would happen at the long table itself, that was certain. Someone had to cut the knot. He got up and wandered over to the Indian and Chinese delegation. A group of about 10 conferring in a camera-free side room. After the usual exchange of pleasantries, he invited the 2 leaders, Hanavada and Sung, to take a walk on the observation bridge. After a glance at each other and quick conversations in Mandarin and Hindi, with their aides, they agreed. So the three delegates walked out of the rooms and down to the corridors to the bridge, a rigid walk tube which began at the wall of their mesa and arched out over the valley and into the side of an even taller mesa to the south. So the three delegates walked out of the rooms and down the corridors to the bridge, a rigid walk tube which began at the wall of their mesa and arched out over the valley and into the side of an even taller mesa to the south. The bridge's height gave it an airy, flying magnificence, and there were quite a few people walking its 4 kilometers, or just standing midway and taking in the view of Burroughs. "Look," Chalmers said to his 2 colleagues. The expense of immigration is so great that you will never ease your population problems by moving them here. You know that. And you already have lots more reclaimable land in your own countries. So what you want from Mars isn't land, but resources or money. Mars is leverage to get you your share of resources back home. You're lagging behind the North because of resources that were taken from you without payment during the colonial years. And you should have repayment for them now. I am afraid that in a very real sense, the colonial period never ended, Hanavata said politely. Chalmers nodded. That's what transnational capitalism means. We're all colonies now, and there's tremendous pressure on us here to alter the treaty so that most of the profits from local mining become the property of the transnationals. The developed nations are feeling that very strongly. This we know, Hanavata said, nodding. Okay, and now you've made the pitch for proportional immigration, which is just as logical as allotting profits from proportional to investment. Oh, sorry. Okay, and now you've made the pitch for proportional immigration, which is just as logical as allotting profits proportionally to investment. Fucked it up again. Sorry, it's the line breaks. Like, if it isn't the sentence structure, it's the fucking line breaks that get me. Okay, and now you've made the pitch for proportional immigration, which is just as logical as allotting profits proportional to investment. But neither of those proposals are in your best interest. The emigration would be a drop in the bucket to you, but the money wouldn't. Meanwhile, the developed nations have a new population problem. So a chance at a larger share of emigration would be welcome. And they can spare the money, which would mostly go to the transnationals anyway, and become free-floating capital outside any national control. So why shouldn't the developed nations give you more of it? It wouldn't really be coming out of their pocket anyway. Sung nodded quickly, looking solemn. Perhaps they had foreseen this response and had made their proposal to stimulate it, and were waiting for him to play his part. but that just made it easier. Do you think your governments will agree to such a trade? Sung asked. Yes, Chalmers said. What is it but governments reasserting their power over transnationals? Sharing the profits resembles in your way your old nationalization movements. Only this time, all countries would benefit. Internationalization, if you will. It will cut down on investments by corporations, Hanavada noted. Which will please the Reds, Chalmers said. Please most of the Mars First groups, in fact. And your government? Hanavada said. And your government? Hanavada asked. I can guarantee it. Actually, the administration would be a problem. But Frank would deal with them when the time came. They were a bunch of Chamber of Commerce kids these days. Arrogant, but stupid. Tell them it was this or a third world Mars. A Chinese Mars. A Hindu Mars. A Hindu-Chinese Mars. With little brown people and cows unmolested in the walk tubes. They would come around. In fact, they would hide behind his knees, yelling for protection. Grandpa Chalmers, please save me from the yellow horde. He watched the Indian and Chinese look at each other in a completely scrutable consultation. Hell, he said. This is what you were hoping for, right? Perhaps we should work on some figures, Hanavada said. Perhaps we should work on some figures. Yes, Kim Stanley Robinson is racist. Breaking news. Paul Bunyan's dick is smaller than yours.